WhiskyJason here, whiskey from the viewpoint of an American over here in Germany, tasting rare and exotic whiskeys. Today I have Fettercairn Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky Warehouse 2, Batch 2, Vintage 2009, bottled 2021. So, Whiskybase number 190016. 6,000 bottles worldwide, 48.5% ABV, around $70 here, 70 euros, I'm sorry, around 55 pounds. I have no idea if it made it or will make it over to the States. Now, there was a Warehouse 2 Batch 1 edition that was fabulous. I really enjoyed it, and therefore many of my friends and I were like, okay, Warehouse 2, we know, Batch 2, click, let's buy it as quickly as possible. And some of my friends, this was back in August, now it's November, so they're like, oh yeah, and some of my friends that are also whiskey tubers in German, they did their videos within 3 or 4 days of getting the bottles. I'm a lot slower, I'm so sorry. And they were mostly disappointed because it tasted totally different. Now, why? So the reason is the cask composition. If you read here, there are 2 different types of casks in here. There are, from the year 2009, first fill ex-rye barrels, that is 38%. So there's a total of 29 barrels. If we do the math, 38% would be 11 of those 29 barrels are rye. And there are 62 first fill ex-bourbon barrels. So it'd be then 18. All right, so that's what we get here. Now, I don't know how well versed you are in the history of rye, but I'm going to go back to a fortune.com article from the year 2015. And it says here, I like the phrase here. It says here that basically before, let's read this literally. Sales of rye whiskey are soaring at a pace that far exceeds the growth of the broader spirits industry, as the revival of classic cocktails inspire a resurgence of the drink across U.S. bars. Since 2009, all right, so go back to 2009, exactly the year this was bottled, or this was not bottled, this was actually distilled, rye whiskey's volume has increased 536%. Reaching over 500,000 cases in 2014, according to new data from the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. Annual retail sales total about 300 million. The growth of rye whiskey has been phenomenal, given that as late as 2000, rye volumes were virtually non-existent, with only a handful of brands in the U.S. market, says David Osgo, chief economist at Discuss. So, 2000, no brands hardly at all. 2009, it starts, and then 2015, there's a boom. So, which means that we can use for rye whiskey, it's exactly the same regulations as in bourbon, 51% rye, and a new charred oak container. So, you can only use those containers once. So, what do you do with all those? Now, up until 2000, which is only 21 years ago, who cared? I mean, they're just so minimal, you'll make a planter out of them. And then starting with 2009, a few of them made it over Scotland, Ireland, and so on. 2014, there'll be a lot more. And so what are you going to use these casks for? Are you going to use them to finish? Now, Glenallachie did that. There is a 8 and 9-year-old Glenallachie out there. And there are also, from something that I'm going to compare it to, actually, there was a 10-year-old Johnny Walker rye, which I also did not like. And there was a Johnny Walker Blender's Batch Red Rye Finish Blended Scotch Whisky here. So it's not a blended malt Scotch whiskey, it's a blended Scotch, so it's with grain. Now, there's a beautiful story online about how they actually had different things here. What was it they said here? More than 50 experiments using over 203 different malts and grain whiskeys were actually necessary before they finally found the recipe for the red rye finish. And they only use 4 whiskeys, and one of them, the lead malt, is Cardew single malt, and they also have Port Dundas in here, which is a closed distillery. So this cost back then, 2006 is when it came out, 22 euros. 22 euros, 70 euros. 40% blended Scotch. Here we have 48.5%. So I'm just going to screw top. We know what we're talking about here. My question of the day is, what other Scotch whiskies do you know that have used rye casks to either mature or to finish in? So what other Scotch whiskeys have had rye finishes, or actually, as this indicates, full maturation in rye casks? So, this whiskey here, as I said, is fairly simple. You have the rye, you have the bourbon. They're both first filled. They're from 2009 up to 2021. Now, the batch number one was a mix here of 40% port cask, 35% ex-bourbon, 20% ex-sherry, and 5% unseasoned European oak. So it was much sweeter. It was much different. On the nose, I'm getting something a little funky, a little bit weird, but there is a spearmint that comes through here. There is a green birch sap moment going on here. The nose is not inviting. Sorry. Over here, Johnny Walker, there's a sweetness. That grain sweetness comes through, which I like. I am a big fan of Paddy, Irish whiskey. If I'm in Ireland, I will try and buy another Paddy and use that and so on. That's something I would actually go to. Now, if to be very honest, I love rye. So if I were to rank the frequency that I grab something in my free time, which bottle do I grab? It would be this. I would go, first of all, you can't see it very well, but first of all, I'd go for a rye. Then I'd go for bourbon, then I'd go for an Irish, and finally I'd go for maybe a single malt or something like that. And so I am a rye guy. I like rye. But the question is, do I like my single malts from Scotland finished in rye casks? That 10-year-old cask strength rye finish from Johnny Walker just didn't do it for me. Other people loved it. This isn't doing it for me either. So I guess there might be some type of aversion to it. I know how a sherry cask influences a single malt Scotch. I know how a port cask influences a single malt. I understand how a rum influences. I understand what a bourbon barrel does to it. I understand Calvados, and I understand red wines, and I understand a lot of things. But what I don't yet understand is how that rye affects then here this spirit. And I'm still learning. That's why I have this bottle here. That's why I have that bottle here. I'm trying to figure it out slowly but surely. Just like a good sherry has a different influence, or a great red wine has a different influence than a bad red wine, I am absolutely positively certain that a great rye whiskey, let's go for Pikesville, will have a totally different effect on the whiskey compared to a Cody Road rye from 2010. All right, so it was one of the worst whiskeys I think I had, or 2014, 15, whatever. There are such a big range of those rye casks out there. 95.5 from MGP versus 100% versus barely legal rye, and so on and so on. There is a big variety of rye flavor profiles out there, and I'm sure that transfers over to the casks and transfers over to the whiskey in those casks that have either been matured or finished. All right, cheers. Mm. It's hot. It's not enjoyable. There is a bitterness in there. Oh, wow. Definitely not my cup of tea. Now, one of my other fellow YouTubers in German actually said, "Oh, I want to try warehouse number 1 and 3 and 5 and so on." Unfortunately, it says here, each release of Fettercairn Warehouse 2 single malt Scotch whiskies will showcase a maturation journey that enhances the tropical distillery character derived from, I need glasses, I'm sorry, the copper cooling ring distillation process. So what it looks like is, according to the box here, we're always going to be getting warehouse 2, and then batch 3, 5, 7, 12, 3,000, who knows, all right? So dear White and Mackay, dear Fettercairn, it would be great if we could also have things from different warehouses. Now, maybe you haven't experimented with anything in different warehouses. Maybe warehouse number 2 is your experimental warehouse. Okay, communicate that to us freaks, to us nerds, a little bit more clearly so we understand what's going on there. All right, this is a D whiskey. It's a value for money D. I really don't like it. What I did in my German whiskey video is I diluted it down from 48.5% down to 35%. I added exactly the amount of water, basically, that the whiskey was, and then I diluted that 35% down again to about 20% by adding another same amount of water. And what I really got was that birch sap moment, and what I really got at the 25% mark basically was a pine sap moment. That birch turned into pine sap, and actually what we have over here in Germany, at least I've had it before, is from the Black Forest honey from pine trees. And there's a special note there that I dislike. My mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law, she loved that. She would actually go to the local beekeeper, and the beekeepers would actually trade stock and so on because, hey, they were not in the Black Forest, and they would actually have a couple little jars of that Black Forest honey, that very runny, very brown type of moment, and she would just buy it and love it. And I was more the rape honey. I was more of that creamy type of honey. That was my thing that I liked the best. So different types of honey there. No, sorry, and I can understand that the variety, the fluctuation in the flavor profiles here are going to hinder people like me and others maybe from automatically buying batch number 3. If batch number 1 was great, yes, it was. And if batch number 2 had also been great, batch number 3 would have been a no-brainer. It's like click, 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 buy. Now it's like, oh, I think I'm going to wait until someone reviews it, and then I'm going to think about buying it. These bottles, August, so September, October, November, 3 months later, quarter of a year, quarter later, are still in the shops, even though there's only 6,000 of those. The other bottles from batch 1, some are still in the shops, but at twice or 3 times the original price. These are actually being reduced in price because, hey, people like me and others have reviewed them and say yucky. All right. The Johnnie Walker Blender's Batch Red Eye finish, on the other hand, I think is nice. Mm. Mm-hmm. There's a minty moment that draws me in. The grain, the sweetness draws me in. There's a little bit of a bitter type of wood tannin slash tree sap moment. I'm even going to say pine sap moment, but it's very faint. And it's almost like a seasoning ingredient that's used that's enough. This is like salt. There's 20 pounds of salt in there, too much. And here they just put a little sprinkle of salt exactly right. This actually draws me in and invites me to take another sip to enjoy and to linger with it. This is like, oh, don't drink it again. Sorry. So it should actually almost be an F, to be honest, instead of the D that I gave it. All right, so help me in my journey towards knowledge. What other producers of Scotch whiskey or Irish whiskey have used rye casks and put on the label and have actually declared rye finish, rye maturation? That would help me a lot. Thank you very much. All the best. WhiskyJason, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for telling others. And I'll see you back here in the next couple of days. All the best. Bye-bye.